integrative neuroscience. Is that
applied?
Applied.
Just the human brain.
The human brain and how
the
it
human
works.
brain. Every home
But
should have one.
That's right. And so he's only been working on it for a few different decades. Let me tell you a story how he influenced my life in ways that I still don't fully understand how valuable it's going to be. And Evian and I worked. We just met each other for the first time in person. But I thought I knew him so well that I believed that I already met him. And we've had probably, 40-odd Zoom calls together. We were running a small public company. Evian was the chairman. I was a board member, persnickety board member. And I still remember this one day. We're having a very, very terse board meeting. And I get a text from Evian, safety first. I'm like, what? And he responds back and he said, well, you can't do anything if the person you're talking to feels unsafe. Assure them it'll be okay. And that was like one of our first meetings. And then from there on in, I realized as much as I had worked with people, talked to people, I didn't really understand how the brain works. And as a result, I couldn't apply it correctly. So Evian's going to try and unpack my brain and others in the next half an hour. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, David. Thanks for being here. My son is a private equity banker, and some of my friends do sort of similar things to what you did. So I really know when the smartest people are in the room and what it feels like. So I get the kind of people and the quality of you all, and talks this morning just been amazing. Mine won't be. I'm simply going to share with you a few thoughts, observations of what I happen to have been privileged enough when from setting up the world's first standardized international database on the human brain. So bringing together everything that can be measured about the brain, how it works, measuring electrical brain function, cognition, genetics. And I had a simple goal. My background was in cardiology, was in serum lipids. So I was doing my PhD in serum lipids. It was an exciting time. But I was introduced to the woman who changed my life. Her name was Mrs. Ples. If you don't know who she is, you should. It's the missing link fossil between humans and apes. 3 million years ago, in southern Africa, was a hominum species walking on two legs that is trebled in brain size. Homo habilis, Homo erectus to us. And my PhD supervisor, wonderful man, he had Mrs. Ples in my hand, turned over, and there she was with the spinal cord at the back of her skull, which meant she walked upright. And I said, Professor Tobias, are you telling me that I am going to spend the rest of my life studying serum lipids and cardiology, and the brain's trebled in size, and the world is as it is, like completely out of control? And this was in a long time ago, in the 1970s. It tells you my age. And he said, yeah, pretty much. I don't think so. I'll finish my PhD, but I'm going to become involved in the brain. And I had a single goal in mind by then. Understand, how is it possible that with all this firepower and intellect of the brain, 90% of all our thoughts are still unconscious? And why is it that in every meeting on the planet, let alone at the Harvard Club, let alone at the talks I've given at Harvard, Stanford, around the world, every talk does not begin with, let's give an update of where are we with understanding the thoughts that actually drive us. Our unconscious biases, our unconscious thoughts, and not just biases. So that's what I did. I mean, I've also had the joy I work for a therapy company that uses many of the tools. There's about 10 companies that have spun out of these insights, and I won't bore you with the details, but I do love working with the American Heart Association just to bring it all back to brain and heart. So what I'm going to spend a few minutes doing is sharing a few thoughts about critical thinking, which is the topic of what Dave asked me to do. But I also was very closely with an artificial intelligence group out of the Valley. And for 50 years, I try to market what I said was a joke. The human brain, every home should have one. Would you like one? How about you, Spencer? Would you like one? And when I knocked on the door and said, the human brain as a system Every home should have one. People just like selling encyclopedias. People say, and I'm not sure I'm ready for that. Let me ask my wife. She's out shopping. When she gets back, I'll get back to you. It was shocking. But now, with AI, and now that I'm working with groups with artificial general intelligence, they are coming and are knocking on the door and going, what are we going to do? Because this is real. This is already happening. And if you are not already today getting your brain ready to understand how you work, how your brain works, how you actually make decisions, which is obviously brilliant, and you all have your methodologies for bias and some sense of how your intuition and rational thinking works. But if you're not ready for the tsunami of change that is already upon us and have not seen how real this is, and you're not working on the most sophisticated measures of biometrics like we do to know and help you to every day of your life going forward, optimize exactly what state you're in with respect to being optimally ready to make the right decisions at the right time of the kind you've discussed, I have 2 words for you. Good luck. So I'm going to snapshot through why. And why might you want to start thinking about not just some perfunctory, banal platitude training about bias, but about seriously thinking about warrior up with the tools that might be deployable to help track and optimize your thinking in real time that you're going to need and already do. So essentially, I'm not going to get too carried away about all the dynamics of how the brain works and the implications for health, which is where Matt and David and myself worked. That is the same idea. The power of precision medicine and big data, which is the big data, this is 6 billion data points in that database. So now the database has become suddenly wildly sought after. But the fact of the matter is the same principles of thinking will apply to precision medicine that will apply to most fields of endeavor that we have. But I'm going to talk about decision making. And I'll begin by saying something that is pretty obvious. If you do not have a strategy to harmonize your unconscious intuition and your conscious rational thinking, you will be stumbling around in the dark. Now, you may have brilliant rationalizations. You may have the fact that because our brains in their 3 million years evolved for short-term shortcuts, you may be very good at those rationalizations. They may work very well for you. But the fact of the matter is these reconciliations are not easy in 85 billion highly interconnected neurons, 100 trillion net connections that are massively neuroplastic and are changing every second. When you hear that sound or that sound, you have microsecond responses to that sound as if it's a new piece of information that will literally rewire almost every level of your brain in some way. But the repeated ones, the ones you get comfortable ones, will just get rewired more, and you'll call that habits, and that'll shape your life. Critical thinking is a mirror of ourselves. So if you really want to get to know yourself, get to know really yourself. And there's only one thing that human brains are interested in, themselves. So you'd think this would be a primary preoccupation. Certainly that people will learn more about themselves than they would play golf. But somehow, because of its complexity, because it's never been distilled particularly easily, because it's hard to do that, it's not often done. Just going to start with 90 seconds on just a sketch.
How your brain works. Safety first is your brain's organizing principle. Unconscious and conscious thinking subservient. Over 90% of your thoughts are unconscious, fast, shortcuts, short-term thoughts. for safety and reward. This includes emotions that identify threat or reward cues in a fifth of a second. Intuition predicts likely outcomes based on previous experience. Conscious thinking, on the other hand, is rational, slower, from about half a second, detailed, and logical, step-by-step decision making. When your brain's emotions, intuition, and rational thinking harmonize, it's magical. This results in aligned self-regulation, peak performance, flow, creativity, and innovations. But when your unconscious and conscious processes do not harmonize, it's like a fractured cauldron for hijacks of dysregulation, inauthentic communication, and catastrophic behavioral outcomes.
Okay, so I'm just going to really unpack that a little with respect to critical thinking. And before I do, obviously we're all familiar in this room with the kind of, even the simplest level of knowing yourself, which is not knowing yourself, by the way. Personality is so far downstream that you've got to see it with a telescope. It's your preferences. They're very far from the actual fifth of a second. 1/5 of a second. We were one of the labs. I had 30 laboratories around the world when I set up the database at Harvard, Stanford, that measured unconscious processing. And literally, we all know Myers-Briggs and the big 5 personality types, but you may want to just spend a bit of time of reconciling, integrating a framework about yourself. What are your preferences? What are your triggers? How does it really fit together about you? So personality is very tractable. So is training biases. We all know the basics, ABC, big picture deductive, inductive details, and of course that's just essentially the basis of the science method. And there's been a bias about rationality that's been centuries old, that myth has certainly been destroyed, because we now know that every decision we make has a very strong intuitive emotion and intuition weighting that needs to be reconciled with its intuition. And emotions has been given a completely misunderstood. They are simply cues that we pick up in a fifth of a second. You can look around this room right now, you can pick up hundreds of cues. The people who have folded their hands, the people who are leaning forward, body language, pupil area, levels of engagement. You could hear cues in voices. They just cues. That's all emotions are. And they tell you about threat or reward. And if you're not masterful at picking up cues, you are missing the point of what emotions really are. And they give you huge patterns of intuition that then will allow your rational, most of your prefrontal cortex was what it did evolve in the tripling of brain size. And lastly, overcoming your biases. Again, very easy to do, because the challenges are so simple. I'm friends with Charles Darwin's great-great-grandson, Chris Darwin, and he says to me that he showed me diaries of his grandfather's writing. He said every single fact that Charles Darwin received, his singular discipline was to challenge that fact and check that it wasn't biased. That is easy to do, and we all do it. Even though we sort of have an idea that we have 100 biases, it seems wacky. That list, that circle which you can't read, is a list of the 100 biases. They are shocking. They are primarily about giving us shortcuts for safety and reward, but they are very real. And the confirmation bias is the one, obviously, that we'd want to implement the most. But there are many, the loss aversion, all the others, that are staggeringly powerful. Who in this room has mastered their 100 biases? 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, 5, 1. For real, that they do automatically in a way that absolutely empowers them. But to finish off the context, before I finish off on the tech, this is the easy part. Hundreds of courses are available, easy to do. You can pick your course. And you all obviously have some methodology, whether it's your checklists, trust your intuition to some degree, seek opposing views, skeptical questioning, and then for those who are really good at it, you align your different top-down, bottom-up, intuitive, rational, and thing. But maybe one other thing you may want to think about, one small takeaway, is that before you make any serious decisions, in addition to the main point, which is be in the right brain state, which is where I'm going to end off in a moment, is to increase your neuroplasticity. If you're in a fight-flight mode, you live in two modes. You're either in fight-flight, you're anxious, or you're in calm and flexible. So to just before you do anything that's important, any decision-making, any speaking in front of people, put yourself into a neuroplastic state. It takes a minute. It can be from knowing how to breathe at 6 breaths per minute, so-called resonant breathing. It could be just listening to the right input of sound. But it's quite important to get into that flexible state so that you're able to make decisions and adapt in the moment. And that is something that is very easy to do and very strongly recommended for any change in your life at any time that is important to you. And so, as I say, all of these mastering bias, emotions, decision making, they're so straightforward if you're disciplined, if you take the time, if you're prepared to let the brain process into your door. It's simple actions, actively perform an opposing view, challenge, what would be the opposite if it were true, and disrupt your confirmation bias, get out of your echo chamber. And the same for emotions. You name a strong emotion just by naming it. It's so powerful. And I'm sure every one of you, to some degree, studies nonverbal communication. If you don't, it's one of the greatest sports in the world. It is just masterful to actually study. We have two languages. One is words, left side of our brain. One is cues and patterns and symbols. And it is just a fascinating language to learn and train and name and break the process. And same with intuition. Trust your gut feel. It sounds so sort of la-la land. But the truth of the matter is it's a message about disruption that is worth integrating and reconciling. Okay, before we end up on tech, most of the talks that I give around the traps are on habits. And the main thing that people don't do when they rewire whatever it's going to be, your critical thinking, or whether it's decision making in the moment, or any of the kind of dynamics and big deal choices that you're talking about to making it is the plan. And we all know there's so many books and stuff on habits. The three main books, Atomic Habits and B.J. Fogg, and the books that really talk about the bigger picture, but they're all the same. You've got to be ready. If you're not ready, you're not going to change. If you've got to repeat small steps, and the small steps are the rewiring. It's literally like a muscle, but it's the patience to understand how it works. This is an actual picture of how it works. You start off on the outside of your brain, and as you rewire it and it becomes compounded, it gets literally wired into like a tight bundle in the middle of your brain. And it's a loop that you can activate at any time. And when people believe the brain biology, they're more likely to do it. But it's a very simple process if it's well designed and you add a few of the latest neuroscience things, like add a bit of more of a neuroplasticity before you train so that it'll increase the wiring. And also every single small step you do, every time, if you do one thing about challenge a bias and you do it, self-reward yourself. It's amazing. There's a lot of science that says when you self-reward yourself, and I mean not giving yourself a cookie, like giving yourself a fist bump, it creates a concatenation of chemistry that enhances the wiring process. Of these billions of processes going on, they are remarkably well elucidated to some degree, and they can be enhanced and out in very simple ways. I think I'm going a little bit over time, so I'm not going to do that. But I want to say cognitive bias, context, easy. Let's end off on this not so easy part. And the not so easy part is the unconscious brain. I don't know how in a few minutes to really summarize the history of the unconscious brain, but we've all in some way, shape or form been studying it our lives. But I'll give you my favorite quote. It's from Helen Schuckman. And it says that nothing is as it seems. Your unconscious brain is your driver. And don't be fooled by what people say, because what they actually think matters. And you will become increasingly aware that even a slight twinge of annoyance is nothing but a veil drawn across intense fury. Now, why that example is so telling to me is it just lets the crack into the light in through the crack of this conscious-unconscious dynamic. That when people say to you, thank you, Spencer, it's great, all's cool, I wish you well, have luck. If the non-conscious body language is not aligned with that statement, who knows what they're thinking. The masks we wear, the veils we set up. What has all of this got to do with decision making? Quite a lot, I think, because if we look at the history of unconscious, and I'm not going to, I promise you, bore you with this, but other than to say it is well-trodden path. Literally, Aristotle knew that there were thoughts outside of our conscious awareness. And it went on and on and on. We all know about Freud and Jung. I mean, of course, Jung. Who can't love Jung? Until you make your unconscious conscious, it will drive your life. And you will call it fate. I mean, seriously, people? And then the marketer's got a handle on it. Like, who hasn't read The Hidden Persuaders? I'm pretty sure everybody in this room would have, because you make your living from understanding how marketing really works. That was the book that absolutely dramatically changed the way that I was going to approach the database. They identified that there were these subliminal, they called them, it's just unconscious, cues that could change the way people bought shit. And then Mr. Cialdini, from a behavioral point of view, Robert Cialdini, 1980, his books on the 7 rules of influence, I mean, they are just pure genius. They are just behavioral summaries. But those marketing rules, by my fancy schmancy friends in marketing, they're still living with them, 1980. But then things changed. When Daniel Kahneman and Tversky kicked the door off the hinges about biases, now they said, okay, people, this is too real to ignore. These simple little experiments that we've done for you, they make it so clear that even random things like the picture on that wall is going to influence my decision, even within the context of your beautiful graphs, by the way, fantastic data, could still have an impact on where you end up, what you're choosing, in ways you have no idea that works. There are random influences on our lives that we at least want to be aware of. And then Taylor, of course, said, hold on. And he, of course, they created the whole field of behavioral economics. But then Taylor and Sunstein came. Taylor got the Nobel Prize for this. Kahneman, by the way, didn't get. He got the Nobel Prize for economics. But coming to this, that we can engineer people for the good. We'll take these unconscious nudges and we'll stick them in a way where people will make the right decision. And they did, and they do. Sadly, we end off of why the reason for tech becomes more critical. What social media did was unimaginable. Not only the greatest heist in history of stealing the world's knowledge and images, but they took these integrated rules, and many of them came to speak to me in the early days. I'm based in San Francisco, asking me, how do these unconscious rules work in terms of changing, making decisions? And myself, and I'm sure hundreds of other scientists around the traps, empowered them with, or at least pointed them to where it was at. And they literally took these rules and they gamified them in a way that we scientists didn't do it that well. And then when they had the money and the firepower and the computers, they gamified not just all of us sitting in this room, but the planet. And so nobody would have imagined that, and there are ways, there are antidotes, but nobody would have imagined the scale of this. So now I end off by saying, well, what can we do about this? Well, these are not complicated rules. These repetitions and the pseudo-random reinforcement, and they can be reverse engineered, just like Thaler and Sunstein did for large-scale behavior. They can be reverse engineered for individuals. And I know people who are already doing that. Now, it's hard to now beat the scale of these corporates because they've got so large, but it's not impossible. There's a law of unintended consequences where these tools are now available. So is the technology. So will there be smart money. There's always smart money first movers. It's only the laggards that kind of hyper cynical about everything, and they wait till it's kind of a sure thing. But they've always been the innovators. And they're coming. And they're coming with empowering people to build those tools that are going to reverse engineer some of this. And again, run out of time. But the same thing for there are so many tools in the history of change, of tools that can help people find what works for them to rewire their brain. And they've got to find, by knowing themselves more deeply, you'll find the right tools that'll work for you, whether it's positive psychology, or we started off literally in 1920s of this is just simply positive affirmations. But there are technical tools like the brain trains itself. So you can give the brain feedback and you can teach it literally to rewire itself. So there's a whole suite of ways you can cherry pick different parts that'll work for you. Of course, the big trading houses have already discovered this and started to measure some of their traders and some of these metrics to see, does it make any difference? And of course, if somebody's got poor heart rate variability, which means they're stressed, what does that do for them? It puts them into a more risk-averse situation. So they're more risk-averse, they come out of a position too early, and that's got huge. Most of these big houses, as you know, they keep their data pretty tight. But this is what I do for a living, and so I come across a lot of this data. Even early morning testosterone actually has short-term benefits for overconfidence, and then until it doesn't. All of these things, they're optimal points where it works most effectively when you get the data right. And so I end off with this, that given the fact that everybody's doing a marvelous job and people have made huge amounts of money, and a lot of the winners are right up here compared to the losers. The winners, even, who is the room I'm talking to here, in my suggested observation, may want to be empowered by the full panoply of metrics that can tell you at every point where your brain state is at. Are you too aroused? Less so. If you think you can read it, the data shows so much that people, even when people do stress training and it's being measured, there's so many other factors, like if you've negative thinking, if you've had a negative battle with someone the night before, if you haven't slept properly, if you're in pain, there's so many nuanced factors that come into play that until there's a database with AI optimization of what state is optimal for you to make what decisions, I think people are going to start being at a tech disadvantage as well as at a conceptual disadvantage. This is just a simple picture to give you a end off on a concrete example. This is from the database that I founded of 1 second of data of somebody, so that's going from there to there's 1 second, of somebody making one wrong move in a maze. And on the right is the wrong move. And the red is the wrong move. And the blue is the right move. Why is that? Why is the red amount of brain activity and stuff more for the wrong move than for the right move?
Well, you feel pain.
Pain? No, this is all happening before you even know anything. It's the second prior you make the move, and then it's the half a second off. You're not even conscious yet.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this is just the second in which you made the wrong move. We measure this on thousands of people over thousands of tasks, and yeah.
Probably the peak is the resolve and the trough is the doubt.
The what, sorry?
The peak is the resolve and the trough is the question or the doubt, whether you got it right or not.
Yes. That's really clever. That's really spot on. So this in 1 second, but the thing is your brain is over-processing information because it's already now doubting itself. It's going, it's not even, you're not conscious, by the way. You're not conscious till about here. And so you've already made the decision, but look at the blue, how little effort it took. Because why? Because everything was aligned. The neurons were aligned, the matches were aligned, you made the decision, and you flow. Anyway, it's just a context. It's not meant to be a definitive. There are lots and lots of other factors that would go into this. And essentially, we are in a position now with integrative technology to train ourselves about thoughts in the moment, not in general, am I going to be sort of good decision making, bad decision, but how am I making decisions in the moment, and can I get real-time feedback about what works for me? Which ones do I get right? Which ones do I get wrong? Now, obviously, it's decision making for trading, but it could also be a peak performance about hit a golf shot. We use the same approach, and we've tested it in both. And who would have imagined that one of my heroes, Steve Jobs, and his bicycle for the mind, what a marvelous, marvelous idea. Who would have imagined that there was also a slightly different variant of that marvelous, marvelous, brilliant intention? And so as we move to an even more challenging intention with AI, AGI, and quantum computers firepowering this hijack, which is what it is, of our unconscious brain's way it works, we make decisions. I'm supposed to just end off suggesting that hopefully we empower with this. By a quirk of luck, I'm part of an XPRIZE health team to reverse aging. We have a drug to reverse atherosclerosis, but the part of it is Anthony Roberts, an ex-BlackRock guy from who headed the client technology experience team on the Aladdin platform. His team is actually building one of these, and I'm sure there'll be others, but I certainly will be wearing mine at the first opportunity and giving it out to all of my son's trading partners. But certainly the database that's going to be personalizing this is going to be super interesting. Having built a database like this myself once, and never seen the kind of excitement about big data that there is today and in this kind of data. And for those of you who think it's going to be super, super complicated, it's actually amazingly straightforward. That's my 5-year-old grandson, Max. He's I'm training him to raise a ball by getting into the right brain state that lifts a fan, switches on a fan to raise the ball that he can then navigate through objects. And my hope that that's the kind of age that we can help empower kids and teach them about how to use technology judiciously rather than just these crazy games. And same, there's no reason to get above the fray. Critical thinking, I think, is a human right. And working with those same people I mentioned, Chris Darwin and Mandela's granddaughter, and Gary Bowles from Singularity, and the world's top-rated futurist. We all have a similar sort of idea, and we'll just be giving out a free critical thinking course along the same lines that I've just discussed with you today. But my hope is that there's a context or two about critical thinking and self in there that reflects the sort of discussions that Dave and I have been having for years. Thanks.
We have some questions. John.
How does neuroplasticity change with age?
Well, that's a great question. Like clearly does. I mean, in the early days, we know that there's such pruning in young babies, that you have these more neurons than there are as adults, and then it's use it or lose it, and then there's absolutely wipeout of neurons that are not wired. Most people at my age, they've kind of given up. I'm 72, and I'm just warming up in terms of neuroplasticity. So it changes with age like everything else. Everything changes with age and not for the good. But the principle of neuroplasticity does not. And we also have the simple bottom line. Neurons that fire together wire together. It doesn't matter what it is, it doesn't matter what age. The only question is that how rigid our thinking is and how much wired our negative thoughts and negative behaviors are. So in answer to your question, this health span, X Prize health span, this largest prize in history actually, $100 million prize. Why are they so gung-ho about it? Well, because a bunch of boomers in the valley are dying, and they don't want to die with chronic illness, and so they've suddenly come up with this genius idea. Let's reverse age. It's absolutely ridiculous notion, because they've got dozens of groups who are actually have already found a way to increase age genetically, which is a real genius idea, because we're now going to have people of 120 where like 70% of them have got Alzheimer's, so that's really smart. So basically, you want to reverse age, but with removing the chronic illness. So you want to really take out the atherosclerosis, in our case, is the plot. But with neuroplasticity, nothing is missing. What is missing is the clarity of purpose of doing it, getting into that mind state before you do it. And I'd like to end off with a concrete example of a friend of mine in New York, Philip Ramiro, who's a psychiatrist, a neuroscientist, and he's using ketamine. Now, ketamine, turns out, is the largest, best neuroplasticity agent we know. You preload what you want the person to train, then you inject the ketamine, and you have the training ready to go. So they really can rewire whatever. Want to be a better trader, want to be a better decision maker, want to be a better whatever. And it works staggeringly well. Now, that's ketamine. People are trying with gummies, and the dosage is critical. So there's a huge amount of details in this. And it turns out that my same friend who developed the drug to reverse atherosclerosis, they've got a way of delivering a tiny dose, but that's got the same impact. And it's actually delivered intranasally. But there'll be lots of other developments of this that's going to make neuroplasticity very real and very possible to retrain. I mean, no, it's not. Today, it is very possible to retrain anything. I've trained elderly people improve their memory in ways that's staggering. Now, of course, if you've got Alzheimer's and you've got a chronic illness and you start too late, there's very little you can do. But if you get it done as early as possible, and the person's got the right framework, the principles do not go away. Sorry for such a long answer, but it just gets a little tougher as you get older, because the old guys like me are carrying so much baggage. And the greatest limitation of people is their own blockers. People hate change, and they'll rationalize and they'll self-sabotage 101 ways, and that's when they're young. By the time they're old, my God, they look really, it's tough. So it is tough, but it's super doable.
I heard a great quote yesterday on the podcast just listened to that said, never underestimate the laziness of the American public. And so all this requires work, hard work to retrain and to redo it. Yes, there's going to be a certain small percentage that will go through the work, but I'm thinking about all the anxiety and depression impacting so much of society today. How does this become easy?
Brilliant question. So that question, which is the one I'll end on, because it's such right to the money, I want to spend a minute on. Because it is the single biggest myth, I think, about why people don't change. I mean, you're 100% correct, but I'll tell you the myth that I've seen over my 50 years of doing this. The human brain, as I said in the beginning, is only interested in one thing, themselves. You agree with me on that? We're aligned so far? Okay, so you think, agree with themselves? But you'd think that they want to do something for themselves that was positive every time, and they'd put up with a bit of pain to do it. It doesn't happen. People don't want to be taken out of their comfort zone. But there's one caveat that they will. Dopamine. If you give people dopamine, you don't have to tell them anything. They're coming to ask you for more. Just look at it. Look how many people are at it. And they'll absolutely break every rule in the book. In fact, they'll become the greatest gamers on the planet to get more dopamine. So what's happening? What happened? Well, if you've got poor, uninspiring teaching, information, and you've given a boring story and then told, no, but now, if you only did more hard work and you went the long way, eventually, if you compounded your interest and if you happen to be, born a Stoic, it's going to be good. It's going to be fine for you. Are you kidding me? That is not the way the brain, if you're lucky enough to be a Stoic, there's a bit of that works for you. It's great. And my Stoic friends love being Stoics. And I go, what about the emotional brain? All that go, yeah, but in the scheme of things, we got it covered. Or my very spiritual friends go, I've got a very clear pathway to joy and happiness. I don't need the brain. Okay, good luck on that one. So my point is, Spencer, is this. In reversing what social media have done, if what I'm about to say to you does not work, we're screwed. And that is this. When you find a dopamine hit that people see they're getting a benefit, but not a benefit in the third term, like a benefit right now, the same speed of benefit that those gamification things send you another TikTok, cat being swung around by its tail or whatever, if you do not give it in that speed, with that level of novelty, with that amount of interest, where the dopamine pings and it's as interesting, it's never going to change. Nobody will change. Nobody changes unless they get a benefit, and that benefit has to be right now. So you could correctly say, well, how come that's never happened? Well, it's happened. It's just drowned in the sea of the clickbait, fear-mongering, titillation, FOMO garbage that this industrial complex is swamping us with. And, but it's there. It's around. I've seen it. And it's growing. But it's got a shot at making behavior change desirable and almost comparable. And then you add the drugs that are good, done in a positive way, rather than just for negative. And it starts also, or electrical stimulation, by the way, which is no drugs. There are ways. A lot of it is just people's lack of awareness of what's possible and people's lack of imagination about how to make money from it. And believe me, that is to feel for another day, but the number of people who are sticking to these simplistic principles are missing massive, massive opportunities in where the world is inevitably going to, it is a brain war. And the brain war is far from over. You look at the history of science, history of scientific revolutions, Thomas Kuhn, 1972, it happens. Revolutions happen, change happens on scale, but it takes very disciplined, big money and big power. It's a chance it happens. But your point as it stands, terrible data about change, very, very strong reluctance that it's even possible. It's just misinformed, in my biased opinion.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Evian.